Hello and welcome back to World 360. Why did a selfie between the Bangladesh Prime Minister and the US President break the internet? Was Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau snubbed during his visit to India for the G20 Summit? And why are all eyes on North Korean leader Kim Jong Un's visit to Russia? We answer this and more in today's episode. So first up, the selfie that broke the internet. Over the weekend, all eyes were on India, which was hosting arguably the biggest diplomatic event in its history, the G20 Leaders Summit here in Delhi. The summit was attended by more than 30 heads of state at a time of fractured geopolitics. It took place at a time when Russia and the West are at odds, the US-China rivalry is reaching new heights, and even as India and China tensions continue to rise amid a border standoff. But the leaders of two countries which share icy relations seemed to have surprised the world when they took a candid picture together. Over the weekend, US President Joe Biden and Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina snapped a selfie at the Bharat Mandapam building in New Delhi where the G20 Summit was being held. Sheikh Hasina's daughter Saima Wazid was also present in this picture. Now this comes as Bangladesh's relations with the US have seen a rocky few months, especially in the run-up to the election in Bangladesh that will take place approximately in Jan 2024. Now in late April this year, Hasina arrived in Washington DC to attend a ceremony marking the 50-year partnership between Bangladesh and the World Bank. She spent 7 days in Washington DC before leaving for the UK and did not meet Joe Biden even once, as is usually expected when a head of government embarks on a tour overseas. Earlier this year, Hasina, while speaking on the floor of the Bangladesh parliament, accused the US of seeking a regime change in Bangladesh. They are trying to eliminate democracy and introduce a government that will not have a democratic existence, she had said. A month later, bilateral tensions grew when the US State Department announced a visa policy to promote democratic elections in Bangladesh. Under this policy, the US will be able to restrict the issuance of visas for Bangladeshi citizens believed to be responsible for or complicit in undermining the democratic election process in Bangladesh. Now, this includes former and current Bangladesh officials. Clearly, the US hasn't forgotten the 2018 and 2014 elections in Bangladesh that were shadowed with speculation that the polls were rigged, and opposition parties had even boycotted the election held in 2014. So in short, Bangladesh and the US have not been the best of friends this year. Let's also not forget that Bangladesh was not invited to the US President Joe Biden's landmark Democracy Summit for the second time this year, while its neighbors India, Maldives, Nepal and even Pakistan made it to the list. Let's also not forget the controversy of St. Martin's Island of Bangladesh. In June, the US State Department clarified that it never engaged in any conversations about taking over the St. Martin's Island. This was after Hasina accused the BNP party in Bangladesh of willing to sell the island to the US when they were in power. She also said her regime might be ousted from power if she did not comply with the US demand to lease out the island. Keeping all this in mind, the Hasina-Biden selfie came as a surprise to many. Not to mention Bangladesh Foreign Minister A.K. Abdul Momen, who spoke to reporters during the G20 Summit here in Delhi, claimed President Biden was so excited before taking the selfie. Now for our second topic, we're looking into Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's turbulent trip to India for the G20 Summit and reports that he was snubbed during the event. In fact, much of these observations are coming from Canada itself. Canada's main opposition leader, in fact, Pierre Poilievre, said that Trudeau was repeatedly humiliated and trampled upon by the rest of the world during the G20 Summit. The front page of a Canadian daily also read, "This way out, Trudeau finds he has few friends at G20 Summit in India." If this wasn't embarrassing enough, Trudeau was stranded in India after the plane he took to the G20 Summit was grounded due to technical issues. Then there was a moment that CTV News and other Canadian news channels interpreted as awkward when G20 leaders paid tributes to Mahatma Gandhi at Rajghat on Sunday. It was reported that when Modi tried to grasp Trudeau's hand, Trudeau pulled away. However, this is not verified. So let's decode all of this. Firstly, while PM Modi held bilateral meetings with several world leaders including US President Joe Biden, UK PM Rishi Sunak and others, Trudeau was only granted a pull-aside meeting. During these talks, Modi raised the issue of Khalistani extremism in Canada and threats of violence against Indian diplomats from Khalistani extremists. During a press briefing after the meeting, to which Indian reporters did not have access, mind you, Trudeau said Canada would always defend freedom of expression, freedom of conscience and freedom of peaceful protest. He added, "We are always there to prevent violence, and to push back against hatred. Now, bilateral relations have been tense between Canada and India in the last few months, especially after 2 Indian diplomats were targeted in pro-Khalistan movements in Canada. The Indian side has repeatedly requested Canadian authorities not to give space to such demonstrations. This is not the first time also that Trudeau had an embarrassing G20 moment. Last year, he and Chinese President Xi Jinping engaged in a heated debate on the sidelines of the Bali G20 Summit, which was captured by cameras. Trudeau reportedly raised concerns about media reports that China covertly funded 11 candidates in the 2019 federal election. Xi then accused Trudeau of inappropriately leaking the content of their discussion to the press. Political commentators such as Charles Burton, senior fellow with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and a former diplomat to China, said the language used by Xi was quite dismissive and threatening during this tete-a-tete on the sidelines of last year's G20 summit. For our last topic, we're looking at the media frenzy over North Korean leader Kim Jong Un's visit to Russia, which is his first overseas trip since the COVID-19 pandemic. The main suspicion, at least according to the US, is that Kim Jong Un and Russian President Vladimir Putin may strike an arms deal that would help Moscow in its ongoing invasion of Ukraine. Let's not forget that this comes just 2 months after North Korea tested its first intercontinental ballistic missile, or an ICBM, named Hwasong-14, and this happened on July 4th this year. This missile is the most powerful weapon in North Korea's nuclear forces. South Korea's military had, at the time of the launch, called it a grave provocation. Now, North Korea's ICBM program has the potential to target the US mainland, while its shorter range missiles can hit South Korea and Japan too. Therefore, this meeting between Putin and Kim could have grave ramifications for the Indo-Pacific and Europe. Russia is currently in need of fresh supplies of ammunition after more than 18 months of the war in Ukraine, and it is unclear if nuclear technology cooperation will also be on the cards between Putin and Kim's discussions. Notably, in July, the Russian defense minister visited Pyongyang to try and convince it to sell artillery ammunition to Moscow. This current visit will see whether such discussions will come to fruition. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters earlier that this will be a full-blown visit by Kim, and talks will also touch upon sensitive areas. The last time Kim visited Russia was in April 2019, where he in fact met Putin for the first time. This came after an unsuccessful dialogue between North Korea and Washington over its nuclear program. Thank you so much for watching. This is Pia Krishnankutty for ThePrint.